Can you hear me now? Every single week, I don't know what it is. Every single week, I go to my control panel and I'm thinking I'm unmuting myself, but I don't. It's the weirdest thing. I've been talking to myself this whole time. The beginning of this stream it must have been extremely confusing for people who were actually here. That is amazing. Oh well, you roll with it, right? Yeah, exactly. Now it's literally happened every single time. It's quite hilarious. I'm pretty sure I should start doing it just for the meme. All right, so we're gonna move on here to some skin tone again. As I normally do, I'm gonna start with my darkest color and move up to my lightest color. For this, we're using a color by Army Painter that is called Tanned Flesh. I find that it's a nice, deep, reddish color, which often looks very nice as a base coat for skin. Especially if you use something a little bit lighter, a little bit more yellow on your highlights, because it adds some really cool texture because you have like this red undertone with a lot of these like yellow tones. It looks pretty cool. So this is a miniature. I watch a stream called Trials of Imagination. They're a D&D stream, and this is one of the characters called Mark. I offered to paint a bunch of their miniatures. Last week we finished up one of the... I can't remember what class she is. Her name is Elbreth. She's an Aasimar. We finished her up last week, and we're starting to work on Mark here. He was a wizard. They're playing a homebrewed version of Curse of Strahd. It's quite fun. There we go. Just want to make sure we got nice coverage all along the face. Now a little bit more water here just to thin this down. Army Painters, I like Army Painters paint for some of the colors that they have, but it tends to be really thick and gloppy, so you really want to thin that down with some water, just so you can get a nice, even first coat. That way when you come back for your second coat, you don't lose any of that miniature's details. Yeah, wet blending. I have a love-hate relationship with wet blending. Wet blending is very, very useful. I find myself, ironically, leaning more towards feathering which ironically, feathering and wet blending is just the exact same thing. I've never heard of P3 paint. I basically, most of what I use is Reaper and Vallejo, and then I have a couple Army Painter stuff. When I first started painting, I used a lot of Army Painter stuff. Lately here, I've just liked the pigmentation of Reaper and Vallejo a lot better than Army Painter. I feel like Army Painter is a little bit underpigmented to an extent. All right. And like I mentioned before, this is a very simple miniature, so a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing right at the beginning isn't going to be too terribly interesting, but we're going to try to make it interesting later on using some really cool blending, and maybe, I don't know, I might do some freehand stuff. I'm terrible at it, but we can always give it a try, and if we don't like it, that's why Paint Stripper exists. Touch this up a little bit. Yeah, Vallejo, I feel like everyone uses Vallejo. They're just one of those standards. Their stuff is great, especially, you know, for the price. All right, so we're going to work on some of the leather trim he has. And speaking of Reaper, we're using a little bit of Reaper here. I haven't decided on anything just yet. I thought about doing, like, writing out like an instructional on like how to do a fireball. I thought that would be hilarious. Like, do like little stick figures with the fireball coming out and then like some writing next to it. I thought that would be a little bit funny, but I haven't decided just yet. But I think whatever it is, I need to make it a little bit funny, just because. Can't take life too seriously, especially when your hobby involves small figures and paint. If you take yourself too seriously, you know, what's the fun in that? It's funny. I'll be the first one to make fun of myself for painting miniatures. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's a little bit dorky, but you know what? I love it. I love people who do it. Oh, what's that? Ooh, I actually have Discord open. Nice. All right, I might actually do that. Okay, so for those of you, thanks for the follow, man. He posted a it's a spell of eternal friendship. This spell casts a spell to instantly acquire deep friendship. You will need step 1, a dog. Directions: buy a dog. That's it. Just buy a dog. I love it. Somebody who has, I don't remember a single time growing up when my family didn't have a dog. So that is absolutely true. Need a friend? Dog. You want somebody that will love you unconditionally? Dog. No matter what, dog is always going to be there for you. Just finishing up some of this trim. Like we did with Elbreth, a lot of this trim is going to be edge highlighted. So a lot of this, after it gets its second coat, it's going to have that nice, deep, rich brown center. And then we'll highlight it with a little bit of the light brown to give it that nice sheen. Kind of almost gives it a worn look too. Nice. I love it. So for those of y'all who aren't in my Discord, it is a spell of poltergeist removal. You will need your thoughts and several tissues. Directions: sit in a room where poltergeist presence can be felt. Step 2, close your eyes. Step 3, think about how terrible your life is. Step 4, cry. Step 5, repeat daily until the poltergeist gets so bummed it finally just leaves. I don't know, that might hit a little bit too close to home. But that is hilarious. I love it. I'm thinking about putting some black, painting the bands on this book. Black, a nice like dark gray or black. I don't think I want to go metallic for it. Now I will say that that is one thing that I really want to get better at is non-metallic metal. I have definitely not mastered that. Where'd you find a book like that? Was it like a gaming store? Cool. I'll have to look at that because that's like a definite buy for me. If it's still in print, that is. All right, so now one of the things that I discussed in the last one of these I made, this is a Hero Forge mini, is the proportions, because it's made to be printed in 32 or 28 millimeter. When you print it out in a 75 millimeter like this, you end up with these really large proportions. So like if you look, the cape here, the material just goes on for days and days and days. So I haven't decided whether I'm just going to leave that blank or if I'm going to paint it brown like I did with the trim. I'll probably paint it brown. But that's one of the things that about, Hero Forge minis. I love them. I even bought one for a friend of mine, but it's just one of those things that's kind of always seemed odd to me. It makes sense if you're printing them in 28 millimeter or if you're getting one of their minis, like actually buying it from them printed. But for a large mini like this, I need more paint. Just looks a little bit odd in as the painter. It's kind of a little bit weird. Yeah, non-metallic metal. I think I've got the blending down, the blending techniques that I would need to use. The difficulty is where the actual reflections go, right? And then sometimes, like, one of the things that I always say is we don't necessarily paint things to look real. We paint things to look good, right? And so, like, there's a pattern or a style right now in non-metallic metal painting where you paint these, like, really cool reflections on, like, swords, where the reflections are, like, polar opposite and opposed to, like, the other side. They look really cool. Definitely not realistic by any stretch of the imagination. But stuff like that is like knowing where to put everything. That's where being a part of the painting community really helps instead of just being kind of on your own. And I will say this, the miniature painting community has probably been one of the best communities I've been a part of. I've gotten no shortage of help, suggestions, really cool and friendly people. One of the reasons I love this hobby so much. Cool. All right, and we'll use this same brown color for the shoes. I typically don't like to repeat colors too terribly much, but there's not a ton of brown on the miniature in places where it really makes a difference. And what I mean by that, a lot of the brown is going to be on the underside of the book or on the trim. And so painting it, using it as like an accent color or a secondary color, I should say, a little bit more forgiving in this instance than some of the other miniatures that I paint where, you've got like straps everywhere and, you might have a wooden staff and then like a leather cap, and then boots and all this other stuff. Like in situations like that, I really hate reusing the same shade of brown. But in this case, it doesn't make as much of a difference. As usual, I really could not care less what this first coat actually looks like, whether or not it's like super clean or anything like that, mostly because I know I'm going to be going back for a second coat. I just want to make sure that I get all of my colors blocked out, and I can fix any mistakes pretty easily on the next layer. All right, and then the next color we're going to be painting are his gloves, which are super easy because they are just gray. So I'm just going to go back to my gray black here, add a little bit of water because it's drying up just a bit. And we're going to paint his little half finger gloves here. See, one of the things that now that I'm looking at this miniature that I really want to decide, do I want to make his clothing, which is fairly simple, interesting, or do I really want to draw people's eye to his face? I'm thinking I want to draw people to his face because really that's what we're looking at, right? Because he's kind of looking down into the book. So I want to make his face a little bit more interesting and intriguing. Draw people's attention there. What's going on, Liam? Look, it's Mark. Draw people's attention to the face and then to what's on the book versus maybe the rest of the clothing. So I'm going to make that look as interesting as possible. Instead of necessarily making his clothing interesting. I'm going to go back to our skin tone here, and I'm going to go ahead and touch up his face. Now I'm going to reuse a much thinner mixture here. Not all the way to a glaze, but pretty close, because really all I want to do is take some of these inconsistencies and just start evening them out so we get that nice even base coat. Just get rid of any of that splotchiness. Then once we get rid of that splotchiness, we can then start to move on to the fun part, which is highlighting. Really start to make his face come to life, which is, in my opinion, is the most is the most important part of any miniature, right? Because yeah, this is resin and acrylic medium and water. That's all this is, right? But we want that acrylic and we want that resin to look like something. And we can make it look good, we can make it look bad, we can do really fancy and awesome stuff, but ultimately we want to make it look like something that's alive, right? That's the ultimate goal here, even though it's not. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and take my colors that I'm going to use for his book. So I'm going to be using a couple different colors. I'm going to be using Citadel's Xandri Dust. It's a nice dark tan color, right? It looks a lot like a parchment. And I'm actually going to use a couple different stages of this. I'm going to use this color alone. I'm going to mix in some Ushabti bone color, so it's a little bit lighter, but it's still kind of in that same, palette color. I'll highlight that, and then I'll highlight with some of the pure, and then I'll add in some of this pallid witch flesh, which is like an off-white. And we're going to use that to really start to define our highlights. Now when I transferred my Citadel paint into these bottles, I pre-thinned it, which is why I'm not adding any water to this. Just makes it a little bit easier to dump into the bottles because everyone knows that Citadel's pots are the worst. At least I feel like they are. But no, I agree with you. So like, I love watching other people paint and figuring out exactly how they do things, right? Because you may do things one way and that works for you, but you might figure out like a really nice tip. One of the things that really helped me with glazing, for instance, you know, everybody was like, oh yeah, just thin down your paint with some water and you know, like run it over the surface and it'll blend it. I'm like, oh, okay. But I was having a really hard time getting it to look good. So I watched another video where somebody was like, oh, well, what you want to do is you want to draw the brush towards the color that you're highlighting with, because it's where you lift up your brush is going to leave the most pigment. I'm like, oh, that makes more sense. So then like that leveled up my glazing. Then somebody else was like, well, you know, when you mix your water with your paint, you want it almost a 50-50 mix. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try that. And it's, oh man, this works so much better. And then again, I watched another video and this guy was like, oh, I'm getting paint all over my handle. It was like, okay, well, you want to use a paper towel to remove a lot of the water. And I was like, dude, okay. And I did that. And like all of a sudden my glazes actually started working really well. They really are. That's why, again, all of my Citadel paint I transferred into bottles and pre-thinned. I love their pigments and some of their colors are great. And then if I want to go and actually, we've got an actual Citadel or a Games Workshop store where I live. But if I want to go and paint there, I have to use their paints. I can't use, you know, like Army Painter or Reaper or anything like that, which is, you know, it's their store, so it makes sense. But so I bought a bunch of their paint and, you know, there are some colors that I like a lot better than some of the other stuff I was using. But again, those pots are just the worst. And their paint is really goopy too. It's not thinned at all like Reaper. By the way, I don't know if you can see this, but I just got a bit of blot sponge here on my dry palette, just to draw the dirty water out of my brush. All right, so that is the first color for the book. You can see it has that nice deep parchment color, and then we're going to be pulling up some highlights from here. Yeah, I get that. The only reason I do go is because the store local to me actually, I have a hard time learning how to play new games or new tabletops just by reading the rule books. I have to get experience with it, and it can be kind of daunting when you're going into something like Warhammer 40K, where it's got so much history and lore, and you know, it's got kind of this culture around it that for me, I was kind of intimidated, and I really didn't want to ask, you know, some random guy at my game shop to teach me how to play, or to, you know, to play my first game with me. But this store offered where the owner would literally sit you down at the table with your army and teach you how to play, teach you how to make a list, teach you about the different rounds, what each one does, you know, and just how to play. And so, like, I really appreciate that. So, you know, I may not like Games Workshop as a company, but I really respect the owner of that store. He's a great guy. He's taught me a lot, helped me a lot with my, you know, painting as well. So, you know, I get that, and I 100% agree that Games Workshop is going a direction that I don't really like. But I still want to support my local shop for those specific reasons, not necessarily because of Games Workshop. Yeah, it was a Games Workshop specific store. And they offer, basically, they offer like painting lessons. They offer like get started. They have a at least the one at my location. I don't know if this is every Games Workshop store, They even have like a beginners league where as a beginner you can go and play with other beginners, and you know, the guy there just does a really good job of building a community at his store versus just selling product. And again, I really appreciate that, so that's why I continue to go to that store. We have a local game shop that is also really good, so you know, I'll typically buy any kind of paint supplies I need from those two places, but every so often I'll have to go online just because, you know, they don't have everything. Like I use monument brushes, and I don't even think Monument's sold in stores anywhere. I think it's just online. Like, they've got a great set of Reaper paints. They've got great selection of Vallejo, and then of course, if I want anything Games Workshop, I can go to either place, but of course Games Workshop is going to have more of a selection. Yeah, from everything that I heard about Games Workshop as a company, I thought it was pretty different too. But hey, you know, again, if they're willing to help people out, even if it's just that one local store, like, you know, I'm gonna see what I can do to support them. Just gonna add one more coat here on this little bit of red. Like I mentioned, a lot of some of y'all weren't here, but because I'm using such a much larger brush than I normally do, I will have to change out my paint water about midway through the stream. So, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, because this guy tends to cater towards his regulars, I've noticed. And again, I think it's mostly because he would, like, of course he wants the quick sale, right? You know, he's running a business and he definitely wants to make a sale. Like, they don't, I've met regulars, like people who know him by, you know, that he knows by on a first, you know, name to name basis, you know. He's got a bunch of tables set up in there for people to come and play. He even like went so far as to say that if you're a beginner and you want to learn to play, he will actually let you use one of his armies to learn to play instead of making you buy your first army, which makes it so much more approachable. You know, my army, a buddy of mine gave it to me, so I was very, very fortunate in having somebody just give me an army. I think I have about 2,500 to 3,000 points of models. But like, if you didn't have that and you wanted to learn, like, it's so expensive just to learn. The fact that he's willing to do that is just astonishing. And it speaks to what he wants. He wants a community. He doesn't just want a store. Yeah. I feel very fortunate because, again, I've heard terrible things about Games Workshop, just like everybody else has. But, you know, I don't want this to be a stream bashing Games Workshop. Like, they've got some really insanely good models. I really enjoy painting them. You know, I'm still painting up my army. I've gotten a lot of it done, but you know, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, the store was like, the store was even closed for a week because the guy had a kid. So like it's and I don't know what the normal like Games Workshop store, but it's literally just a guy in like a shop. Like, he doesn't have like employees other than himself running the store. So I don't know if that's normal or not, but that's the way that his store is right now. All right, so I'm going to switch to a smaller brush here because there are some skin. Might help if I actually put some water on my brush. Some parts on some skin on his neck that I can't get to with that big old brush, so I'm just gonna take my number 3 brush and see if I can't get in there. Cool. So glazing is when you take paint and you mix it with water so that you have a much higher medium or water to pigment ratio. And essentially what it's doing is it's lowering the amount of pigment that you're actually applying to a miniature. And what you would use this for is when you're trying to blend between two colors, you can use glazing to make that transition much smoother because you can control how much medium is being placed. You just keep layering it and layering it and layering it until you eventually get to the result you want. The only problem with glazing versus something like wet blending, like what you were saying you were trying, wet blending is much faster, but it's also much harder because you're working with acrylics that dry quickly. Glazing is a little bit easier to control the transition between light and dark, but it takes much longer because you have to wait for each layer to dry completely before adding the next layer. And you might be adding 10, 15, 20 layers before you really get the product you want, depending on how much glazing you're actually doing and where. There's a couple different ways of glazing you can do. For instance, if I took and I wanted to glaze this book page from the color I have it now to a very light color up top, I could do it one of two ways. I could simply keep putting layer and layer and layer and working back towards the apex of this hump. And what would happen is I would eventually get more and more intense pigmentation as I work towards the very peak of this page because I'm putting down more pigmentation with each layer. That would take, again, 30 to 35 layers of work to actually get that smooth transition. Or the alternative is I can paint the peak the color that I want the peak to eventually be, and then just use a glaze to work that really stark contrast. You know what? This is dry, so I'll go ahead and just see if I can demonstrate. So this is going to be my first highlight color on the page. Basically what I'm going to be doing here with this book is the very apex of this page and then working down towards the little bottom of this, and then right here at the edge is all going to be highlighted, and I'm going to leave the center of the page dark to give it, even though it's physically curved, this will give it a little bit more of a curved look to it and reinforce the actual sculpt that we have going on here. I'm going to do the same thing with the middle part here. So that would be like, you know, that it's highlighted, doesn't look great, but it's highlighted. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a little bit of this paint, I'm gonna set it to the side away from my paint pile here. I'm gonna take some water. I'm just gonna start mixing this water until I get about a 50-50 mix of water to paint. So that's about right there. I'm gonna take my cloth here, I'm gonna actually wick away a lot of the water, and I'm gonna actually check it on my thumb to see how much pigment I'm getting. It's actually probably a bit much, so I'm gonna add a little bit more water. Wick it off, test on my fingernail. That's a little bit more what I'm wanting to do. So then what I'm going to do is, moving in the same direction each time, I'm going to go from the darker color to the lighter color, and I'm just going to blend in this line. Just like that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now this is definitely not complete, and I'm going to have a bunch more layers to do. But once that dries, a lot of that pigment is going to be almost completely transparent. And I will simply continue to add layer on layer on layer until I get to the actual level of pigmentation that I want. The other way of wet blending, so I'll take a little bit more paint because I'm going to need more. Do the same thing. We're going to add water. So we get about a 50-50% coat. Now this, I want a little bit more pigmentation on it because I'm starting from scratch. And I'm just going to start layering up. Again, moving towards the center because that's where I want my heaviest pigmentation to be. And again, that's going to dry almost clear. And we just keep doing that over and over and over again until we get the pigmentation we want. And now that this first layer here is almost dry, you can kind of see how you're starting to see a nice transition between that dark and light area right there. Can't see it really well because my lighting in here is bad and I'm using a webcam. But, you can kind of see that transition already starting to blend there. And that's what we're looking for. Very important that we always move in the same direction each time. I'm just going to go back over here, and I'm actually going to just correct this a little bit because it was a little bit wonky. If you find that you have too much pigmentation or you feel like you have too much paint on there, you just take a damp brush and go back over it, and what it'll do is it'll wick away a lot of that. Now with this side, unlike we're doing with that side, we're actually going to start to work our way from the point that we started up a little bit. So we want to start closer towards the apex this time versus further away. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us two different levels of pigmentation between the part where we started and the next glaze. And again, that will give us a little bit more pigmentation in that area, eventually building up layer over layer, a little bit darker, a little bit more intense, giving us a smooth transition. In glazing, you don't necessarily need to use glazing for stuff like I am, which is layering, right, and blending. You can also use glazing if you, say, put down a paint that you think is too dark. Okay, then what do? Well, you maybe take a lighter version of the paint you're using, or maybe a white or something like that, and you glaze that over it with very little pigmentation, a lot less than you'd use, like for instance, what I'm doing. You just go over those dark areas, which would give you a lighter overall pigment than what you started with. Now, what I'm doing is I noticed that line was a little bit too stark, so I just took a little bit of my original color, created a glaze from that, and did it in reverse. So I went from light to dark instead. So you always want to move from you always want to move your brush towards the color that you are glazing. Right. So if I wanted to glaze, for instance, let's do this. I'm gonna take some of this gray here, and I'm just going to paint over the side of this miniature here, just like that. I'm gonna let it dry. And I'm just going to glaze a bit of this Pallid Witch flesh over it, because this is a much lighter color. Or I can just do it on the side, because the side, so you see how dark this is? If I just glaze over it with white, first of all, you can see that gradient already starting to right there. So you see how when I lift up my brush, I'm left with a pool here on one side. I'm gonna wick away some of that, and we're gonna take away some of that. Just like that. So what we'll end up with is a gradient from lighter to darker. Now this is just a quick thing and wasn't really trying too hard, but yeah. Or again, if we take that bit of dark black or gray black that we did there, we just take a little bit of glaze, do it over that. Once that dries, it will give us just a lighter version of that color. Instead of it being gray. All right, so now that this is drying a little bit, we can see that we're getting that nice gradient. This side, a little bit of the same, but I am seeing that some of the glaze that we were using from the back side was pigmenting the top a little too much, so we're just gonna work that edge there. Again, when I'm using this method of glazing where I made a hard line, I really don't care too much about the bulk of the area like I am with the other glaze. I'm just trying to blend that line in. Ooh, let me check. I like that sword. That is super cool. Yeah, I'm super basic. I'm just using I'm just going ultramarines. I'm using blue boys. Hey, dude, I'd rather be lucky than good any day. If it was a happy mistake, then be happy it was a mistake. Alright, so now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to look for paint that I'm going to use as my base coat here. And I think I'm going to use Barbarian Flesh because it is a little bit lighter than my base coat, but still along the same color. So this is Barbarian Flesh by Army Painter. And for this, we're just going to use, you know what? I'm going to go back to my number 3 brush for this one. It's a nicer brush anyway, because this is a synthetic brush, but it's a really nice synthetic brush. But this one's that nice Kolinsky sable hair, which especially for my more precise work, I really like using them. So you can see just in the dry form or the wet form how much lighter that is. It's several shades lighter. So this is what's going to be our base coat, or our mid-tone, I should say. Try to get that nice point. There we go. What we're going to do is we're just going to start painting all the edges on his face. where light would catch and reflect. So like on the cheekbones, the jawline, the chin, the top lip, the nose. All those areas. And this very first coat isn't going to look too terribly noticeable. And that's okay. That's what we want, actually. We don't want it to be a super stark contrast at first. So we're just starting the highlighting process on the face. But we want to leave a nice deep recess right there where he would have kind of that concaveness to his cheek. I don't know if concaveness is a proper English word, but you know. I'm American, we don't use proper English. And on the other side, we are going to do the exact same thing. Imagine that. With this highlight, we're going to work all the way up to the eyes, but we're going to leave the top of the eyes in the eye socket, the base coat, because again, we really want that deepness to his eyes. Now, one thing that I do want to emphasize here, at least I do when I'm painting faces, I really try to leave the jaw rounded off. I don't want any sharp edges because there really aren't true sharp edges on facial structures, right? So even though somebody might have, say, a really angular face, if you really look at it, it's not actually sharp. It just looks sharp. I'm just looking at it, making sure all the highlights are where I want it to be. Interesting. So I don't know. I've tried using contrast paints in a couple different ways, and me personally, I've never actually been able to use it well. Maybe it's just I don't know how to use it, which is absolutely 100% a possibility. But I see all these people doing really, really cool stuff with contrast paint. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. All right, so now we're moving to, for our highlights, we're using Reaper's Fair Shadow. And we're going to add a little bit of that Barbarian Flesh into it just to darken it up just a smidge. Because we don't want our highlights at this point to be super, super contrasty. That will come in just a second. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I've never had really good luck with them. But again, everybody, I've seen so many people do really cool work with contrast. So now what I'm doing is I'm working my way up. One of the things that you want to do with highlights, especially for skin, is you don't want to take the highlight all the way to where your midtone was, because then what's the point? You just want to work it all the way up to, it's hard to describe without showing you. So what I did here with this highlight is you've got shade, base tone, and then right up from the base tone more towards where the light source is coming from. That's where the actual highlight is going. So same thing on the jawline. We're just going to put it right at the edge. Just like that. We're going to kind of paint over the eyebrows a little bit because we're going to come back with some other paint and fix that. Adding a little bit of highlighting here for that little, I don't know what this part of your head is called, but like you usually have like a boxiness that comes from right there. Right in front of your, like on the top part of your temples. And then of course we're highlighting around the outside of the eye socket as well. One thing I'm noticing is I'm thinking the red is a little bit too intense on this highlight. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this Barbarian Flesh, and this is going to be what I was talking about with glazing earlier. I'm just going to take a little bit of a, that's very lightly pigmented, so not a ton of pigment. I'm just going to add it to the middle of the cheek just to soften that up just a touch. Just like that, and when it dries, it should be a little bit transparent. Just cut back on that really intense redness there a little bit. Just like that. So it's still obviously there, but it is not as intense, and it kind of blends in a little bit better. Well, I was talking, so for that bit, I was talking about more along the lines of the cheeks, but the part on the forehead I was talking about is you have like a line here on the outside of your socket that's kind of right where like your head begins to turn really sharply towards your temple. There's usually a flat bit right there, and that tends to catch the sun on some people. So that's the part I was talking about specifically. And then we're going to come in with our brightest highlight, and we're just going to add that just to the very tip top of the eye socket, top of the cheekbone. Tip of the nose, going down towards the sides of the nostrils, edge of the jaw, onto the chin, just the very top of it. Kind of give it a little bit of a line highlight down here. Kind of like that. All right, cool. Now, what I'm going to be doing next is taking more of this, oh, what is this color called? It's another Citadel color. Corn red. And we're going to start with the eyes. So first thing I'm going to be doing for the eyes is I'm not actually going to be painting them white. I'm going to be starting with a base coat of red, and I'll explain why in a bit. But for this, I'm going to have to get the miniature pretty close to my face because I can't see that good. So give me 1 second. A little bit more water there. And I did move to my number 1 brush here too. There we go. All right, sorry about that. I know you probably couldn't see what I was doing, but again, I need to get close because I am pretty much blind. But I just painted the eyes red, and the reason why I painted the eyes red is if you look at an eye, you obviously have a lot of blood vessels and things in your eyes. And if you take a picture of somebody's eye and you look at it, right around the edge where the eyelid like meets the eye, you're going to see a little bit of a red line there. And you'll also see that on the inside of your eyes and on the outer corners of your eyes. So what I do is I base coat the eyes red, and then I will start, when I'm infilling the eyeballs, the actual like whites of the eyes, I will leave a little bit of that red on the outside edge, and that gives it that red effect that we would naturally have. So just a little trick that I learned from, what's his name? He's that guy from Sweden. I can't remember his name right now. Really big YouTuber in the miniature painting hobby, and I cannot remember his name. That's really sad. So now I'm done. I'm not really done. I'm gonna let the paint on the face dry. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna highlight just the tops of Mark's fingers here. While I always try to do a good job no matter what part of the miniature I paint, when painting things like hands and stuff that really isn't as prevalent, especially when I want the focus to be on, say, the face, I'm not going to spend a ton of time making it look as fancy or as realistic. Not because I want to do a poor job, but because, again, if I'm adding details that aren't necessary for it to look good, it might draw attention away from the places that I do want to draw your attention to. So if I want to draw attention to the face, I'm going to put, yes, Squidmar, that's the one. I learned to do eyes from watching Squidmar. He's a really, really good guy to learn from. I couldn't believe I can't remember Squidmar. Jeez, it's such a memorable name too. And one thing I noticed just looking in closely here, again, just want to soften those lines up on these highlights a little bit. So we're just going to use a glaze just to make those lines a little bit less prevalent. Because again, we want this miniature to look good, but we don't want it to look cartoony, so we don't want to make it look like a comic book with sharp lines and the like. So I'm just going to go in with my highlight color and just glaze over any hard lines that I'm seeing. That will help soften everything up. Now, in some places, I do want a hard line, and so I will leave there. But for the most part, because your face is soft, sounds like a weird thing to say, I want to make sure my transitions are soft. Now, this paint water is absolutely disgusting, so I'll be right back. I'm going to go change out my water. Be right back. Make sure Mark doesn't move for me. And didn't take that long, did it? Now it's all nice and clean. Make my life a little bit easier when I'm cleaning out my brushes later tonight. All right, so now that we've got most of the face done, I think it's looking pretty good. Let's start on the hair. I guess class is in session. All right, let me go back to my reference photo here and figure out what colors I want to use. Because Mark has kind of a brownish red hair, at least in the reference photo. So what I'm thinking about doing is using a light brown, almost a red brown, dry brushing that over this dark gray, and then highlighting in with more of a reddish brown, a lighter reddish brown colors. So I'm going to use Reaper's Mud Brown because it's kind of a burgundy brown. It's a little bit darker than I want it, but I can always lighten it up with a lighter brown, which is what I'm going to do once I find the lighter brown that I'm looking for. Literally have my entire paint rack here and I cannot find the paint I want. What is going on? There it is. Like come up with like the flat cap and like a that would be hilarious. So I'm gonna lighten it up with a little bit of leather brown because again it's a little bit of a has a little bit of a red tint to it, so it'll do a good job of lightening it up but not desaturating it. So that's one thing. If you've painted for any length of time, you should notice this, that when you paint and you add white or black to a paint, it doesn't just make it lighter, it actually desaturates it. So if you add white to red, you don't get light red, you get a pastel pink. If you add black to a red, you don't necessarily get burgundy, you might get a black red, right? So if you are wanting to darken or lighten a color, and you have the advantage, like I do, of having multiple different shades of the same color, then just use a darker version of the color you're using, especially if you don't necessarily have the exact shade you want. So I'm going to take a little bit of this brown, apply it to my dry brush. And we are just going to put that over his hair. It's very hard to be controlled with a dry brush, but I am trying my best so I don't get any on his face. So I'm just going to make sure that I have an even coverage with the dry brush. So now we're starting to move lighter. We're still a little bit dark, right? We still have a lot of that gray black showing up, which is fine. Because we are going to progressively get lighter and lighter and lighter until we get to the point where we are thinking the shade is just right. Cool. So now I'm going to add a little bit of a light bright red. Just a drop or two, just to bring out that red color. And then a little bit more of the leather brown to lighten it up again. Why is that so pixelated? I have no idea. That's a little weird. Looks like it's being censored or something. There we go. Now we've almost got like a rust brown going on here. And we'll take the same dry brush. We don't have to clean it off for this, because we actually want a little bit of the color that was already on it still on it. I'm just going to start running that over. Now for this pass, I'm not really looking for coverage. I'm not looking to make his hair red or even lighten it up all that much. I just want to give hints of that red color, just so that when we do transition more towards a light brown, we're not just all of a sudden punched in the face with a red highlight, right? We have a nice transition between the two. All right, now we're really going to start cranking up the light. So I'm going to take some more of this dust brown that I had earlier. Mix that in, because this will bring this from a brown to almost a yellow. I am going to take, again, the same dry brush. And by the way, what I'm doing here on my thumb is I'm actually testing for opacity on my thumb, because with dry brushing, you don't want too much. Exactly. You don't want too much paint on your brush, because you just want to hit the raised bits. You don't really want to hit the recesses, because remember, we want to leave those recesses nice and dark. So we're just going to start lightly, gently making passes with the lighter color here. Now we did get a little bit of over coverage in some places, but we'll go back and we'll just drop a little bit of, I think I might just use a shade, or not a shade, what does Citadel call these things? Well, they call it a shade. That doesn't help. A wash. Why couldn't I think of wash? It's late. It's not really. It's only 9:20. At least in my part of the United States. So you see, we're starting to get a little bit brighter, a little bit lighter. Now, in the reference photo, it goes to almost a orange color. It's an orangey red. Just going to dry off my dry brush here, because I am done with Big Boy. We're going to his cuter cousin. And I'm going to take some of this witch flesh that we had earlier, this nice bright color. Add a little bit of that in, and then I'm actually going to take some of this skin tone here, because it's giving me a little bit of red and orange. It's not exactly the color I want, so what I'll do now is we'll pull in some more of that brown color. bit, just a dash of orange, just a little bit. Get rid of most of this paint because I think that is about the shade I want to go with. And we're just going to lightly just touch the absolute highest bits with the dry brush. And what I'm doing here is I'm not expecting this to give me any kind of coverage or highlights. What I'm really looking for this to give me is a reference of all those peaks and valleys to make it easier that when I come back with a brush with the shade I actually want to use, it'll show me essentially where to put those bright highlights. All right, cool. So I'm just looking at the reference photo, making sure that I've got my shades right. I think I do. So I'm gonna start taking some of this and start doing my manual highlighting now that I've done my dry brushing. I'm just gonna take my brush, I'm gonna run it alongside just the very, very top peaks. Almost like I'm doing a line highlight. Or edge highlight, whatever you want to call it. And this part's probably going to take a little while, but again, it's all about where we want to draw attention. Since I want attention to be on Mark's face for now, I am going to make sure that I frame it well so that if the face doesn't automatically grab your attention, the hair will. Which actually, this is something very similar that I did with Zyle's miniature. His hair was white, or is white, I should say. And I actually painted him, I painted the hair black first, and then dry brushed gray, and then dry brushed white. And it turned out absolutely fantastic. That's interesting. So what do you do on the oil fields? Are you like a drill worker, or? I have no idea what that entails, so I apologize if like I'm coming out of like absolute left field. I have no idea what jobs exist on an oil field. Gotcha. Okay. I'll let the guys who live in Canada talk about Canada because I have no idea what a Cape Breton is. As I live in the deepest of South in the U.S. My brother is my second cousin twice removed. Nice. Dude, so my dad's actually been a firefighter for several years. He's one of the few people in the place that I was raised that that is hazmat qualified, and there was a massive chemical spill, like a train spill, in near my hometown. So he was gone for like working 80-hour, like all day. I was almost at 80-hour days, like no 80-hour work weeks. You know, I think we saw him come home maybe once just so he could grab a new uniform before he went right back to managing that spill. I think it was a chlorine spill, actually. Only reason I mentioned that is because my ADHD brain saw somebody mention deadly chemicals that could kill everyone, and that reminded me of my dad doing that. Ah, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. They're no fun at all. All right, I think that hair is looking really, really nice. I don't know, Liam, what do you think? It's your mini? I think it looks cool. Awesome. Nice. Really, Cal? Be nice. All right, so I'm going to move on to the whites of the eyes. And you notice I'm not actually using white. Again, I'm using this Pallid Witch Flesh, this off-white. Once again, if you take a picture of your eye and you go into, say, Photoshop. I mentioned this 2 streams ago, so a week back from today. If you take a picture of your eye and you go into like Photoshop, and any part of the white of your eye isn't actually going to be white, it's going to be slightly off-white, and there are going to be parts of it that are almost gray, like right at the top underneath your eyebrow. And so for this, we are actually going to use an off-white to color in the whites of Mark's eyes here. Once again, excuse me, I'm not going to be able to show this on stream very well because I need to look really close because eyesight bad, I guess. This part about the eye for me is probably one of the most critical parts of painting eyes. And I know it's very hard to see what I'm actually doing. What in the world? There's like a thing on the tip of my paintbrush. But what I'm doing is I'm using very, very, very small, very, very small. Oh my God. Very small brush strokes. Just to make sure that I'm controlling where the paint is going. And for the right eye. There we go. We have the whites of the eyes done. All right, so now I'm going to move back to the book. It's gotten some time to dry, and as you can see, I'm much better at the wet blending technique that I used on this sheet. Not as much on this sheet, so I'm actually going to do some corrective work here. Moving back to my big brush. And back to glazing. And we're just trying to fill in that line and make it a little bit less of a stark contrast. Because nobody invited Tony here. Bad joke is bad. All right, so like I mentioned, we're going to move all the way up to this lich flesh here, but we're only going to put it on the very, very top most portion of these pages. This is part of the part that requires a nice steady hand. We're going to use that to edge highlight this whole thing as well. All right, time to glaze. Shocker, right? I haven't watched it. I do watch a lot of Miniac. He's one of my favorite YouTubers. I was watching a couple of his just a painting videos where all he does is paint a miniature and kind of explain what he's doing. So very similar to, I guess, what I'm streaming right now. And I find those to be a little bit more useful than actual painting tutorials, because sometimes in painting tutorials you can kind of get lost in what he's actually doing. Just depends on the person doing the tutorial, I guess. But I've always found that his actual painting videos are more helpful for me than his tutorials. So see there, we're just adding that nice highlight right at the top of the page to give it a little bit of life. Ah, gotcha. So I've actually, and I mentioned this, I think last time on stream, that I actually have considered talking to some of the females in my life to teach me how to do makeup, because that would be exceptionally useful when doing miniature painting, right? Because it teaches you things like where to put contrast and where to put highlights and blush and color and things like that. Yeah. And that's the big thing, because like skin's weird, right? So skin is just weird because skin doesn't follow the normal rules of light, right? Because when light hits your skin, it gets absorbed and diffused and weird stuff happens, and it's stuff that you would think would normally happen doesn't happen. It just kind of gets odd, right? So when I'm doing skin, I always find it fascinating, like when I watch other people do it. I'm like, oh man, that looks so good. How did you do that? And I'm realizing, oh, well, it looks good because they know exactly where light would actually sit on their face, right? Something I'm definitely still working on. I think I do a decent face, but that is definitely something that I'm still working on, and then I'll probably be working on for a long, long time. So I don't know if you watch Miniac, I don't know if you saw the video where he did the space chef with like the tentacle. I watched that the other day, and it's so amazing, like the colors, contrast, and stuff that he used for his style of face. And it's stuff like that that I really want to figure out for myself how to do. So yeah. All right. So what I'm going to be doing now, I really want to start to work on the clothing. Start to really work that up. But actually, before I do that, I'm looking at the reference photo, and it has a really interesting transition that I'm looking at now that I actually want to do. So it has this burgundy on the little badge here, but it almost fades in from almost black. So I'm going to take more of this gray, which it's starting to dry up a little bit, that's okay. I'll take a little bit of the red. I'm going to mix in a really dark red, almost a black red. But not black just yet. That's a little too dark. Let's add a little bit more red in there. There we go. And I need some water because this is very dry. Not very dry. It's still pretty recoverable. But what get back here, Mark. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going just in the edge, around the edge of this, and darkening around the edge a bit. Like that. Take a little bit of water. And just start working those colors together. Like that. And then what I'm going to do is what I'm going to do is once that dries, I'm going to take some of my Nuln oil and I'm going to do a recessed shade along the inside of that just to give it that nice dark tone. But we'll have to wait for that to dry. And while it dries, I'm going to work on looking at this miniature, and it has this really cool flamey bit around the neck, so it's almost a gold and yellow, but my gold color is in the other room. So I'll be right back. Again, make sure Mark doesn't move. All right, cool. So went into the other room, and I got Reaper's non-metallic gold highlight in base. And even though I'm not doing non-metallic gold, these are very nice yellow colors, which I think will give me the shade I'm looking for here. So I'll take my number 3 brush. Now, one good thing, you know, I kind of mentioned earlier how these miniatures tend to have more exaggerated features. That actually helps when doing something like this, because instead of running my brush along it, I can actually use the side of my brush almost as if I am edge highlighting. I don't have to worry about it getting on anything else. And I'm not expecting to get full coverage on the very first try. You always want to, you much rather go not enough paint than too much. Because if you end up covering up those details with too much paint, Time to strip it, start again. So it's much more preferable to just take your time, build up your layers, and preserve all that lovely detail. What do you mean like white? So I really like Reaper's Pure White. That's what I use. You can also use, oh, for coverage. Well, it depends, right? So if it depends on what you prime with, because white in and of itself, like if you're trying to cover black, you're not going to get very good coverage with any kind of white. If you're covering gray, you know, you might get better coverage, but still, it's you're covering a darker color with a lighter color. That's always going to be a challenge. But also look at, I guess you could say, high art or fine art supplies. So instead of buying, you know, instead of buying paint that is like made for miniatures, go to like a local art store and buy paint that was made for actual like acrylic painting. Typically they'll give you better coverage. They'll be, you know, not necessarily cheaper, but more cost effective, right? So instead of getting 1/8 of an ounce for, you know, $5, you'll be able to get 5 ounces for $25. $25 is more, but the cost per ounce is much less. So it's a little bit more cost effective than miniature paints. It will typically come in much thicker, so you will have to do a little bit more work in thinning it down. But your coverage will be significantly better, and it's a little bit cheaper per ounce. The white and black that I use in fine art, I think it was by a company called Golden, something like that. Comes in these little tubs instead of droppers. Again, the only issue with it that I found, at least, is it is extremely thick because it's made for, you know, like actual painting, not necessarily miniatures. So you'll have to thin it down a little bit, but the coverage is pretty decent. I got the titanium white and then the true black. Only reason I'm not using it on this miniature is because I'm not really using any white with this miniature. I'm using a lot of off-whites and alternate colors. And we're just going back over this little trim that we just painted just to make sure we get some nice yellow golden color. Golden yellow. It's yellow gold! That's dumb person speak for just gold. Well, I guess there is white gold too, but nobody says yellow gold. You'll notice every so often I'm going back and rinsing off my brush, even though I don't need to necessarily because I'm not transitioning colors. That's just to get rid of any dry paint that might be accumulating on the brush. Ooh, shaky hand. Stop it. All right, so base layer on the yellow is done. I think that looks really smart. Yeah, I know a lot. I've never actually used Pro Acrylic myself, mostly because none of the shops around me sell it. But again, I think it's called Godin. Again, it's a fine art supply, and it's made for art, right? It's made for people who are blending and doing all these sorts of things without doing a miniature. So it's designed for good coverage. It's designed for blending, all that kind of stuff. So on my source image here, Mark has some nice blue eyes, like me. So we're gonna want a bit of a darker blue. Not necessarily dark, but you know what I mean. Maybe. I don't know. So I'm actually going to use Reaper's Sapphire Blue here, because I think that is a nice blue for eyes. It's also what I used to use for my highlights on my Ultramarines before I started using other things. You know what? We're doing irises. I should be more prepared. I left my magnifier. Guess where? In the other room. So I'll be right back again. I promise. Wednesday, I might be a little bit better prepared, but I'll be right back. I went here. So, I'm not putting my headset on because I need to put this on. Just my little magnifier here. Because we're about to do irises, and irises ain't easy. Haha. So once again, I'll try to explain what I'm doing here, but I won't be able to show it on camera because, you know, I need to see what I want to do. So, what I'm doing, I'm just adding these little semicircles in his eyes. So when painting eyes, your iris is never actually seen unless you're really holding your eyes open wide. And so whenever we're painting eyes, we kind of want to make sure that our pupils, or our irises I should say, are being covered up. If they're looking forward, are being covered up by the top eyelid. Jeez, I'm batting 1,000 on thoughts today. Words are hard. Or the bottom if they're looking down. We don't want the entire iris showing unless you're really going for a surprised look. once again, we're using small, tiny little strokes here. Every so often, I'm just stepping back just to make sure that things are looking good. Because one thing that I've noticed about painting, come on, there we go. Painting in general, is things look a lot different when you're up close than they do when you're far away. It's just looking up every so, that might seem obvious, but just making sure every so often you look up. There we go. So I'm going to move over back to my white color, or my off-white color, because I did make a little bit of a boo-boo. I just want to correct real quick. Have to let that dry and then go back with my blue, because right now it looks like kind of looks like Mark has a lazy eye there, or like he's able to control his, have ungodly eyeball control. The source image I'm using is Matt 2-Bit Lane, who is the DM of Trials Imagination, sent me a source image along with the file that he sent for me to 3D print this miniature. So that's the source image I'm looking at. I am noticing something I'm not liking here on the face. So I'm going to go back to my skin highlight color, and I'm just going to correct that real quick. Just like that. All right. Now we can take this stupid thing off, and we have irises. So, one of the things that I do, I don't remember who first suggested it, but one of the things that I like to do is use what is known as a micro pen for pupils. I don't really like to use a brush because a brush can be fickled, right? If you have, for instance, too much water in your paint, the black could run and you could ruin the eye that you work so hard to do. If it's too dry, you end up with nothing being left behind. You know, if your brush doesn't have a very nice point to it, you can end up having splotchy iris instead, or pupil instead of having a round pupil. So I like to use a micro pen because it works every time. It's always going to be round and it's always going to be consistent, which is the key. I can consistently use this and get the exact same product. I cannot do that with a brush, not with irises. So I use a micro pen when I'm doing that. I'm also going to use a micro pen for if I put any writing or spells in the book. That's also what I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using a micro pen. So, drop my micro pen. Put the headphones back on because reason I have music on is for you lovely people, but I also like the music. And I'm noticing a little bit here, areas that aren't quite where I want it. So I'm just gonna come back with my glaze, straighten that out. And one thing you gotta be careful if you ever get to the point where you're using Kolinsky sable brushes. Kolinsky sable brushes tend to hold water really, really well. So whenever you're using glazes, you really want to make sure that you're dabbing off a lot of the excess. Because the last thing you want is to leave water lines, because water lines are the absolute worst for your miniatures because they don't look as good. Okay, so we're working on this nice smooth transition here. Now moving back to the back edge of this page. And we'll do the same over here. That is starting to look really nice. Cool. All right, now I'm going, and I know it seems like I'm jumping around a lot, and I really am. But I'm gonna jump back to this little thingy here. I'm not sure what to call that. Chest piece? I don't know. And we're going to really quick do some recess shading. So my favorite thing to recess shade with is Nuln Oil. It's a great shade. Not sure what's going on with my small brush here, but so I'm gonna use a number 0 brush, and I'm just gonna get a little bit of that Nuln Oil. Good grief, that brush is looking rough. I'm gonna have to do something with that. Yeah, I'm not gonna use that now. We'll use this bad boy. Same size, it's just a synthetic brush. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this shade and I'm just going to run it into these recesses. And it's just gonna make it a little bit darker, get it closer to that true black that we have in our source image. It's the same technique I would use on my ultramarines. Just going into all those crevices and making sure that we have a nice dark shadow where no light would really shine, right in the deepest recesses. Just like that. Easy peasy. Put that brush away. All right, now I'm going to move on to starting to edge highlight and build out the highlights on this yellow bit here. So for that, I painted it, base coated it with this non-metallic gold base. Now I'm going to take the non-metallic gold highlight, and we're going to use that for our highlight. Really looking to just put this around the edge. I'm not looking to go a really deep highlight. I'm just looking to make a more dynamic looking garment. Again, I'm not really trying to make it look metallic. And I'm not trying to draw attention away from the face and the hair and the book. I'm really just trying to make it look a little bit nicer than what it already did. On these thin parts, I'm really going for that very thin line highlight, but right here at the bottom, I'm going to put a little bit of a thicker one. The top and the bottom. And then we'll go back, start doing this really nice, thin edge highlight here. And one thing I missed here, looks like we had a bit of a oopsie. I'm just going to correct that real quick. And we're going to switch to the inside here for that edge highlight. Cool. And we're going to do the same thing all around the edge wherever we put that yellow, we're going to go around and just add a little bit of that color for the highlight, just on the edge. The key here whenever you're edge highlighting is really to make sure that your paint isn't too wet. You really just want a more dry consistency, because that will prevent it from running into places you don't want the paint to run. Some of these places I am going to, instead of using the edge of my brush like I do with edge highlighting, I'm going to draw my brush through, because it's a little bit difficult to get a nice clean edge highlight on some of these more curved places. So we're just gonna draw our brush across. This is where having a brush with a very nice point comes in handy. Just like so. And all of a sudden we have a significantly more dynamic looking miniature. It's little details like that that are really going to make things pop. You know, when I first started painting miniatures, basically all I would do is paint the colors, throw a wash on it, and call it a day. But the more I learn and the more I start to explore different techniques, the more I realize that, like, it just looks good. I really want my miniatures to start looking like quality pieces of work. And in order to do that, you know, you can't just apply a wash, call it a day. You really have to pay attention to some details that might take a little bit longer. Yeah. That's really what makes your miniature look good. And especially if I'm doing this for somebody else, like for instance, Liam, since I'm doing this for you, I really want to make sure that what I'm doing is the highest quality that I am capable of. Because if I am unwilling to paint a high quality miniature for my friends, then who else would I do it for? You could say, oh, I'm doing it for myself, but it's always better to share art than to keep it to yourself, in my opinion. As in Cal Snacks? Why? Oh. Fair enough. I mean, to be fair, well, Anakin does have red hair, doesn't he? For whatever reason, I thought Anakin had black hair. I'm ashamed as a Star Wars fan that I thought Anakin had black hair. So now we're just going to try to transition. I painted the top red, almost like a sunset look. And now I'm just going to try to blend these two together. I think he's less talking about like the actual design of the miniature and more of like the face and the hair. Not necessarily that the whole miniature looks like Anakin, but certain features look like Anakin. More water. Yeah, that's good. Fair enough. So now what I'm doing is I'm actually glazing these two colors while they're still wet. Just trying to see if I can't get a little bit of a wet blend going with these. And I think that's good. And because of this highlight, or that process, we lost a little bit of our highlight, but that's okay because we still have paint and we can go ahead and correct that. I think that looks baller, dude. I really like that transition. All right, so now the next step is going to be to start highlighting and shading his pants, leather, and jacket and the little hood he's got here. But as you can see, my wet palette is pretty much full at this point. So we've got a ton done. We've been going for a couple hours now. How long have we been going? About 2 hours, 20 minutes. So I think I'm going to stop here for tonight. And I'll be back on Wednesday, 8 o'clock, just like today. And we will see if we can't finish mill it up. So thank you all for showing up. You know, XC, it was great meeting you, man. And I look forward to seeing y'all next time. Cal, Liam, I hope y'all have a wonderful evening. I did call you Miller, didn't I? Frick, it's Mark. I'll finish Mark on Wednesday. Holy cow. All right, well, Liam, Digital, Cal, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And till next time.